Hey guys, I'm Zaya, and I'm a student at COA, and I have prepared a lesson for you guys. Um, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen. It's sort of a lesson that gives a little bit of a history of the agriculture of Maine, and we will be talking with you, me and my fellow students, with you about this through the next couple of weeks with your classmates. So here is my slideshow. Um, And I bet you guys are familiar with this map. This is sort of the map that we're used to seeing of Maine. It's the map that um, we as Europeans, or I guess I as European, am used to seeing. It's the map that the United States has decided where the borders of Maine are. You can see the straight line along New Hampshire, the sort of border along with Canada. And those are sort of arbitrary borders. And that's not how Maine has always looked. It feels very like this is the border and this is the way it is right now, but this isn't always how the state of Maine um, has looked. And in this picture, this is also the state of Maine. You can't see any borders though. This is just the land surrounding, including and surrounding Maine. And this is what it looked like for when the Wabanaki people were the only people living um, on this land, so before European settlers came. And the Wabanaki that were in Maine were mainly in three groups: the Maliset, the Passamaquoddy, and the Penobscot. And as you can see, their lines aren't straight and strict like the European lines that we're used to. These lines are much more fuzzy. So they might have been some places at some point, other points, and then somewhere else at another time. Um, so the Wabanaki people were people that moved around a lot. They would go in and out, they would follow their food supplies. They were not a people who were participating heavily in agricultural practices. So they weren't staying in one place and cultivating food. They weren't necessarily planting seeds and then tending those plants and waiting for them to fruit. They did that a little bit with some corn, beans, and squash, but that wasn't the main source of their food. Um, Mainly, they were coming down to the streams. We think for the springs, especially to fish alewives and smelts and other sea run brook trout, and possibly heading inwards towards the center or north of the state during the winters. Um, and this is all based on our best guesses because we don't know for sure, or I don't know for sure, anyways. Um, and so this was the people that were living on the land before white settlers came to the United States. Um, and when white people came or Europeans came, they made settlements. You can see that the circles are English settlements and the triangles are French settlements. And so they were starting to settle in the 1600s. And you can see all along here are places where people tried, some successfully and some unsuccessfully, to settle in Maine. And those places were mostly right along the coast. And these first people that were settling the land from Europe were mainly a farming people. They were having small homesteads. So they were growing food that was then eaten by them. The goal of these farms was not to produce excess that they would then sell. The goal was to feed themselves and their animals. And if they had extras, that was great. And they might share it with a neighbor or trade. But really, they were getting just what they needed in order to survive and supplementing that some with fishing and hunting and all of those good things, but mostly farming for themselves. So, not a lot of trade of food was happening. But this changed after the Civil War and the expansion of railroads. And we can see here in this map, there's a railroad the Maine Central Railroad that came up along sort of close-ish to the coast, but not always right along it. And so in this period of time, there were the farms were starting to change. Um, there were still many small farms, homesteads, if you will. But in addition, there were more people starting to have bigger farms, especially in the south of the state. And the reason this was happening was because they could ship food. With a train, it was much easier to take some food grown in Maine and transport it to Boston without it going bad. They didn't have to go with their horse and buggy. Um, and so this was a change to the food system of Maine. So the way that food was um, getting from place to place. So instead of it just growing from your garden, then into your storeroom and into your plate, or just straight from your garden to your plate, it was maybe traveling a little bit farther. People were using money to buy food. Um, and with this shift, more people were starting to grow single crops or monocultures, meaning one crop, as opposed to many different vegetables. And the farms that they were growing, or the vegetables they were growing, I'm sorry, were mainly potatoes, corn, and then other dairy products, so cows. And so corn was often happening in the southwestern part of the state, was a better place to grow corn. And then in the north and and east of the state, sorry, was where they were growing people were growing more potatoes. And that's still sort of the case today. Even it's a little less dramatic. Also, during this time period in the 1800s, wild blueberries became something that people in Maine, especially in Hancock and Washington counties, realized was a marketable thing because we have these wild blueberry fields. And in this time period, people started managing those to sell and ship to other places. And this was possible because in the beginning of the 1900s, we were just coming up with some new technologies to keep foods frozen longer. Also, we had just invented canning, and so foods could stay good. They wouldn't go bad in shipping if they were frozen or canned. Um, Also during this time period, um, lobster was becoming much more of an industry. People in New York City and Boston were wanting it as a delicacy. And so fishing and fisheries became much more part of Maine culture during this time period. When before lobster had been super plentiful and it had sort of been a more lowly person's food, it was now something that was to be desired by fancy people in cities. And so many Mainers were turning to the ocean to fish lobster to then sell to New York City.